What you see right here is a Stripe screenshot, and I hate Stripe screenshots. I wish they were banned. But I was sent this the other day, and I posted it to Instagram because I thought it was cool. And then I kind of hit myself and said, what are you doing, Ollie, posting this stuff? Because what happens is people see revenue claims, they see Stripe screenshots, and they don't properly interrogate the numbers. They don't understand what they're actually looking at. They think that $1 million in revenue in the first 12 months of a business, of a brand new business, means I have $1 million in my back pocket. And it doesn't work like that. We need to be able to critically interrogate numbers to understand exactly what they mean. Because if you don't, then you're always going to think that everyone doing business on social media is far more successful than you. And often it's not the case. So in this video, we're going to examine what could be behind this in order to really judge those hideous Stripe screenshots that you see posted everywhere. In case you don't know me, my name is Olly Richards. I'm the founder of StoryLearning.com. I'm also a mentor and advisor to other online education entrepreneurs. And when I started my personal brand, this one right here, I actually went back on social media for the first time. So I've never used social media before, really, like for business. I have accounts, but I've just never, like I never go on Twitter, never go on LinkedIn, all that stuff. I know how bad it is for me. But when I started my business brand, I kind of wanted to, because I've seen the importance of channels like LinkedIn these days for audience growth. Someone who's had been lucky enough to have some success, find myself looking at other people sharing their success and kind of feeling these stupid reactions of like ego or jealousy or envy or whatever, and realizing that even like me, after doing this for 10 years, I am not critically analyzing the stuff that I see. And what this taught me was that if we are not really careful about how we interpret the information we see online, we could be made to feel permanently inadequate, permanently living in the gap, as Dan Sullivan calls it. So let's dive in. So what this shows you here is a screenshot from Stripe from it's a business that I helped start 12 months ago. I have an ownership stake in the business, and the team sent me this a few days ago, and it shows that we passed $1 million in revenue in 12 months. That's the first 12 months of the business. What that does not mean is that me, Ollie, now have $1 million in my back pocket, not least because I'm not the full owner of the business. And we'll get onto this in a second. So if showing $1 million on a screenshot means that you don't have $1 million, which is most people's blanket assumption, then what does it mean? Well, it's going to be different for every single business, but there are some questions that you should ask and some things that you should be aware of that will tell the full story. So let's go through what some of those are. Now, the first and most obvious question is, what is the profit on that $1 million? Because what you saw there was revenue. So what is the profit on that? It's perfectly possible that for a new business, there was zero profit, because you can make money, but you're also spending a bunch of money. So is it still impressive to earn $1 million if you have $0 left at the end of the year? It's unbelievable how few people understand that there is a difference between revenue and profit. You have to spend money to make money. And if you do it all by yourself and you use your time, well, okay, you haven't spent money, but you spent your life force, and it's not scalable. So that's an even worse form of profit, because there's only so much that you can do. Your time is now tied to that thing. So what is the profit on that $1 million? Now, I'm not going to tell you what it is exactly in this case, because it's a private company, but these are the sort of questions you should be asking. It's very normal for huge businesses to have 5 or 10% profit margins, which means if you've got a business that's doing 10 million in revenue, it may only have 500,000 in profit. That's quite normal, especially in certain sectors, certain business models, and the larger businesses you get. Next question is, how was it generated? Now, you might say to yourself, well, I don't care. If I could make $1 million, I don't care what I do. Really? If you had to spend a year cleaning toilets, would you do it? If you had to move to Silicon Valley and sit in a kind of high pressure office for 16 hours a day for a year, getting berated by your boss, and I don't know what happens there. That's like my worst nightmare. Would you do that for $1 million? Some people would. It'd be a very well-paid job. The point is, you've got to think about how that was generated. If it's software and you spent an entire year tearing your hair out, doing nothing but firefighting in order to make that work, would you still do it? Maybe. But it's worth asking the question, what needed to be done in order to make that money? There are things that you would not want to do, even for $1 million, trust me. Next question is, was there any capital involved? For a lot of new businesses, capital needs to be either invested from the founders, borrowed, loaned, or else raised from angel investors or venture capitalists. That means you might generate $1 million, but whoever invested it or put money into that thing now has the right to some of that revenue or ownership of the business. Point being, it's not all yours. So what kind of capital was needed? Did you have to put in $1 million in order to generate $1 million in revenue? Maybe. Is that good or bad? Well, it's neither. It depends. We don't know what's behind it. We don't know what's coming up. If you invest $1 million to make $1 million in year one, but you'll make $2 million in year two and $10 million in year three, that becomes a different proposition, right? Point is, you don't know what kind of money had to be put in order to create the business that generated that revenue in the first place. Was there debt involved? Did they have to get a bank loan or borrow a bunch of money from someone in order to start the business? It's relevant, right? Because if so, how much? Is that debt still on the balance sheet? What interest rates are they paying? All of that is going to affect the outcome, maybe not today, but certainly into the future if they're carrying big interest payments on the debt. Next is that $1 million in revenue monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenues, or is it one-off? Now, you may say, well, I don't care. But if it's one-off revenue, then that means that come January the 1st, you're now going to have to work the same to make that revenue all over again. Whereas if it's recurring revenue, then you could probably expect to retain a fair amount of that revenue into the following year. It makes a difference, and it most certainly affects the valuation of that company. If you wanted to sell it, you're going to get a much higher valuation if that is bringing in recurring revenue rather than labor needs to be expended every time you want to bring in that money. What kind of overhead is necessary? I mean, this is kind of similar. There's overlap here. So, the profit and the capital invested in the overhead, they're kind of similar in a way in terms of they're all the cost of generating that money. But, do you have to have a 20 grand a month office now to house all the staff who are going to be generating that money? If so, again, that's very relevant. You've made that money this year, but now you've signed a 5-year lease for an office or for machinery or whatever, raw materials, goods, whatever it may be. What kind of overhead is involved? And lastly, this is one that people really don't talk about. Co-founder split. In other words, if there are profits on that $1 million in revenue or the future profits of that business, how is that going to be split? Is it all yours or are there co-founders? And I can tell you in the case of this business that I showed you the screenshot from, I'm a minority owner in this business. There's more than just one person involved, which means if there are profits, then it's not mine. It's split between one person or more people. And this is really relevant because so often, so many businesses, so many entrepreneurs have co-founders in their business. And I think often people get into co-founder relationships, like sometimes without really thinking through the consequences. Obviously, if you need a co-founder in order to create the business, then they are completely necessary. If you want to build a software company, you're going to need a technical co-founder, most likely. I mean, not necessarily, but if you're starting an agency, for example, do you really need a co-founder in your agency? It's a big question and very important because whatever money you make with that agency, you're going to have to split it in half. Let's say you're in a business with 4 co-founders. If you make $1 million in revenue, and let's say $1 million in profit. If you are the sole founder of that business, then guess what? You have the rights to all of that $1 million in revenue because it's your company. Happy days. If you have one co-founder, you now only have the rights to $500K of that business. If you have 3 co-founders, in addition to yourself, then that means for every $1 million in profit you generate, you're only getting $250K. And this is a big deal because when you're looking at revenue claims like this, not revenue claims, when you're looking at actual revenue or valuation, you cannot assume that the person who is showing it is the sole owner of those proceeds. So to take a very, very simple example, and this is something I see all the time. Let's say you have, in this case, let's say there's $1 million in revenue and there's a 30% profit margin, which is kind of, depends on the business, but it's kind of standard. So 30% margin, so you end up with 300,000 in actual profit. And let's further say that there are 3 co-founders in the business, you and 2 other people. That 1 million in revenue at a 30% margin generated you 300K in profit, of which you are entitled to just 100K for yourself. And so the revenue that you're seeing equals only 10% in profit that is due to you. This is a very, very common scenario. And you get people that sell businesses for tens of millions of dollars and they'll stick it up on their social media and think, wow, that's pretty amazing. But do those tens of millions of dollars go to them? Almost always the answer is no, because you're going to have capital that's been raised by investors. So your investors might own, say, 50% of the company, and then you've got 3 co-founders. So a $30 million sale might only mean $5 million for the co-founder, for an individual co-founder. Now, obviously, that's a fantastic result, but it's not 30 million, right? There's so much story behind the numbers. So don't take them at face value. Always ask what is going on behind the scenes that is actually going to paint the complete picture of this business. Now, in this video over here, I show you the pathway through which a regular online education business can go from 0 in revenue up to 7 figures in revenue, whilst also allowing the founder to work only a few days a month. If you want to know how you can build a business which you do own completely and make a lot of money from, well, go and watch that video now.